morning. I'm Pat Thurston. Russ Baker is my guest. His book is Family of Secrets, The Bush Dynasty, America's Invisible Government and the Hidden History of the Last 50 Years. And Russ, let's talk first. Let's go back. Let's talk about Prescott Bush. Who was Prescott Bush?
He was a very, very important figure.
Now, is he George Herbert Walker Bush's father?
Right. In other words, the grandfather of George W. Bush. Right?
Got it.
Yeah. He's a very important and little-known figure of the 20th century. He was a United States senator, but more importantly, he was involved in a banking firm called Brown Brothers Harriman. This was the most powerful, wealthiest private investment bank in the world. And this bank is very, very interesting for quite a few reasons, one of which was that the partners were influential in every American presidential administration, irrespective of party. They would just alternate. It's a little like Goldman Sachs now. They just always managed to be in there in the inner circle. And another interesting thing about Prescott's group, Prescott was Dwight Eisenhower's golfing partner. And so he was with him constantly, talking to him. A group of people involved with Prescott Bush were instrumental actually in even choosing Dwight Eisenhower to be president of the United States. And one of the literally hundreds and hundreds of revelations in Family of Secrets that are entirely new is the secret relationship between Prescott Bush and Richard Nixon, involving the creation of Richard Nixon back at the beginning of his political career. He was an enormously powerful man, a kingmaker. Another partner of his, a man named Robert Levitt, was the father of, or the author of, the creation of the Central Intelligence Agency.
No kidding. And Levitt was part of Brown Brothers?
That's right. Levitt was a partner there.
Wow. Now, Skull and Bones. Prescott was a skull and bone. He was a bonesman, right?
Many of these people were. He was. He came into Brown Brothers Harriman. One of the both of the Harriman brothers, Roland and Averill, were both skull and bonesmen. Many of the people in Brown Brothers Harriman were in this secret society at Yale.
And wasn't Prescott Bush? There's some rumor or an implication that he was involved in actual grave digging, the theft of Geronimo's skull.
That story is out there. I haven't personally looked into it. There is a story that they did this as some sort of a prank or a ritual for Skull and Bones. Prescott is a very interesting figure. He appears to have been involved in intelligence himself back in World War I. His whole history in that war is sort of murky, but some of the things he did, for example, in the 1950s, he was a close friend of Allen Dulles, one of the most powerful directors of the CIA.
And controversial.
And very controversial. And one of the things that Prescott did was he, before there was any kind of real congressional oversight of the CIA, Prescott did it. And he actually, and I have this story in Family of Secrets, at one point this CIA, this intelligence operative tells a story. He's in Hong Kong. He was involved with an operation to try and kill the Chinese leader Zhou Enlai. They were going to try to poison his rice bowl. This failed. Prescott Bush flies out to try to figure out what went wrong with the plot.
Was he officially working with the CIA?
Well, he was a senator, but whether this was part of his mandate. I mean, at the time, the Armed Services Committee had something to do with intelligence. This is before there was a Select Committee on Intelligence.
Yeah, right. And he also, was it Prescott who was charged under the Trading with the Enemies Act?
What happened was their firm had been doing business in the 1920s with some very powerful German industrialists, and with the rise of Hitler, whose success was actually funded by one of these German industrialists, there they were basically handling his money, and the industrialists began trying to get his money out as war approached, getting his money out of Germany, and so they were the fronts. And Prescott sat on the board of this front company in New York that was in charge of handling this money. And when this was discovered, and of course by now it was wartime, and here they are handling this dirty money connected to the Nazis, there were actual Senate hearings on this. This has been covered up, as have so many aspects of our history.
Yeah, well, a lot of the things involving intelligence have been covered up. Now, you said that Prescott was involved in establishing the Central Intelligence Agency?
His partner, Robert Levitt, actually created the blueprint for it. They convinced a very reluctant President Harry Truman to sign this National Security Act that created the CIA, the NSA, and so forth. Truman was very reticent, and they told him, this is basically, you need a peacetime intelligence gathering body. And he said, I don't know why. We've always had the State Department could do that, diplomats could do that, and so on. And they said, no, we really need this in the time of the Cold War. So he reluctantly agreed. And very interestingly, some years later, he came to regret it. And in 1963, at a very interesting point, right after John F. Kennedy was assassinated, he published this unusual and little-known piece in the Washington Post, an opinion piece, Harry Truman, where he said basically that he regretted creating the CIA, that he never intended it for to be involved. I think he said something like this kind of hanky-panky. He said that was not... In other words, they were never supposed to do any of that covert action. All of that stuff they do now with thousands of people and billions of dollars all over the world destabilizing governments and taking people out and stuff, they were never supposed to be doing that.
But isn't it true that piece that Truman wrote appeared once in the Post?
You're very well
never
informed, Pat. You know what? It appeared once in an early edition of the paper. It did not appear in the later edition. It mysteriously vanished. Allen Dulles flew out to Independence, Missouri, and asked Truman to withdraw that, to sort of retract that. Truman refused. And Allen Dulles then wrote a false remembrance in a book where he said that Truman had told him, he regretted saying that, when he never did.
Isn't that amazing? 808810. But, the question remains, why? I mean, why would the Washington Post or any other newspaper not pick that sucker up? This was the president of the United States.
I'll tell you exactly.
Or the former president.
I'll tell you exactly why. In Family of Secrets, there are extensive treatments of the Washington Post, the people who owned it, its ongoing relationship with certain elements within the Pentagon, military contracts, and particularly with the intelligence apparatus. The owner of the Washington Post considered himself a kind of an amateur spy. He considered himself a great patriot, and he was very, very close with Allen Dulles and that whole group. Extremely close. In fact, if we have time, get into some of George H.W. Bush's early businesses when nobody knew who he was. One of the biggest funders of this strange little company was the owner of the Washington Post.
And what's his name?
Graham, Philip Graham.
Yeah, and then Catherine Graham took over the Post.
That was
when
her father,
died.
That's right.
I thought it was her husband. You see?
I'm sorry, her husband, excuse me. Her father was Meyer, Eugene Meyer, who first owned the paper, and she married Philip Graham, and then he came in.
All right, we're going to take another break. We'll come back. My guest is Russ Baker. His book is called Family of Secrets, The Bush Dynasty, America's Invisible Government and the Hidden History of the Last 50 Years. By the way, we will have this book on the KGO website at kgoradio.com. Of course, Lynn will have this up by tomorrow morning. You'll have the name of the book, but it'll be in the on the KGO bookshelf, making it very easy for you to order the book. That'll happen on Monday. 808-0810 is our telephone number, 8080-810. I'm Pat Thurston. Russ Baker, my guest. You're listening to KGO News Talk 810.